Okay, so welcome back. Recently we did a two-part series where we looked at how you can develop some really awesome user interface graphics in your Visual Studio Windows Forms applications. And here's just some examples of some stuff you can do. We got flashing lights, we got images with shadows, we got gradients, we got a button that has some cool graphics on it. And over here on the right we have what's called a panel. And inside the panel, it's got some radio buttons that you can select. And in this video, we're going to talk about this control, this panel control, and also a very, very similar control called a group box. And the two are so similar, you might wonder why do both exist, because they're very, very similar. So we're going to talk about the differences, the pros and cons, and how you can implement them. And as you can see here, the panel here on the right has a blue rectangle, it's got some shadows, and there's some transparency in there because these radio buttons have a transparent background where you can see the image in this panel, and there's also transparency so you can see this gradient in the main form. So it's a really nice way, this panel control or a group box control, to group other controls together. And the purpose is to give the user a visual clue that says, hey, all of these radio buttons, for example, are associated with a particular function. And you might have another panel that has other controls associated with a different function. So it's a really nice way to direct the user and to clarify for the user what the different functions are, and also to give some nice visual graphics that make it nice for the user to use the application because it looks really cool, and people like it when it looks really cool. So we're going to talk about in this video the panel and group box control, what are the pros and cons and the differences, and how to implement them in your C# Visual Studio Windows Forms application. I also encourage you to look at the other video where we showed how to do these user interface graphics, because we get into some areas that we're not going to cover in this video. For example, how do you implement those transparencies of the controls? So if you have multiple controls on top of each other, how do you make everything look like this with a nice transparency and so on? So let's take a look at the group box and panel controls, pros and cons and differences. So here I am in C# Visual Studio Windows Forms, and I've just added some controls to this form. On the left, I've added a group box. Just go to Toolbox, down to Group Box, drag and drop that. And here I've added what's called a panel. So again, Toolbox, go down to Panel and just drag and drop. I've also added a couple of text boxes and a couple of buttons. So by default, I'm going to start this up, and you can see that there is this text for the group box, and you can barely see an outline of the group box. The panel has no text, no outline, nothing. And the buttons, I'm just going to print to these text boxes as I hit the buttons. So right away you can see a difference between the group box and the panel. The group box defaults to a very barely visible outline, and it's got a title, and the panel has neither by default. So let's take a look at the properties of these two controls. So I'm going to first select the panel, and if you look down here at the different properties, there is a border style property, and it defaults to none. And I can set that to fixed single and start it up, and you can see it has a fixed single border. Now if I select the group box and look for border style, I've got back color background, there is no border style. So there's that barely visible border, but there's no border style setting. Now with the panel selected, if I go here and look at, there is an auto scroll property and it's set to false. I can set it to true, and what that will do is if the contents of that panel need to be automatically scrolled, suddenly you'll get some scroll bars here and it will scroll the contents. Not sure why you need that, but it's there if you need it. Now if I go to the group box and look at the properties, there is no auto scroll. There's auto size mode, there's no scroll bars. So the other difference is that the panel, you can have scroll bars that automatically scroll. The group box, they don't. So the primary differences here seem to be that the panel has settable borders group box doesn't. The group box has a text name and the panel doesn't. But that's about it for the differences. So next, let's take a look at, say you've got your group boxes and you decide, okay, I want to take these controls and put them into a group box or a panel. How does that work? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to drag select this button and the text box and bring it over inside this panel. And I am going to start up the application and press the button, and you can see it works fine. I'll do the same for the group box, move it over inside, start it up, and it works fine. So to add controls to either a group box or a panel, you can just select them and drag and drop. Now what if I want to remove them? I will select and move this out, and then I will select and move these out and start it up, and they still work. So what if I decide to move these controls into either the group box or the panel by cutting and pasting? Well, let's try it. I'll select these, cut, select the panel, paste, and then I will do the same here. I will cut, I will paste, and now let's run it and see what happens. So I click the button in the panel and nothing comes up. I click the button in the group box, nothing comes up. So that tells us that you shouldn't cut and paste controls into whatever group box or panel you want them in. It's best to drag and drop into the panel or the group box, but not cut and paste. So I'm going to now move these back out. And I'll run it, and you can see we have totally lost something in the operation of these. It turns out that you no longer have the connection between the button click event and the event handler. You can fix that if you go into the controls and you go to, for example, for the button, and you go to the event, you can see the click event down here has nothing associated with it. So you'd have to go and you would have to add a button one click event to that. So it's best to just select, drag and drop into the control. So now one of the main things that you can do with these panels and group boxes is add, as we showed in the previous videos, add some nice graphics to give the user a nice indication that certain controls belong together. So again, I encourage you to look at those videos. So that's it for the group boxes and panels. If you like any of these videos, I encourage you to hit the like button, subscribe, hit the bell notifications. But most of all, please let others know that we're here so we get some views. Really appreciate it. Otherwise, take care. Have a really good day. Thanks.